a 10-year-old founder of a company. Meet Carter, ladies and gentlemen.
The family's visit to the forest inspired a beautiful question. Mother, mother, am I a tree? You tell me to stand tall. You tell me to stay rooted. I think I am a tree. My child, of course you are. But what kind of tree will you be? The kind to hug or the kind to climb? Doesn't matter which you choose, so long as you choose to be a tree that's kind.
Make the forest part of your story at a park near you. Find one at discovertheforest.org.
I'll do that right there, and then I might actually also do it to record it to, I think I'll do YouTube.
Are we going to be live on YouTube, or?
I think we'll have a live conversation there as well, just so I can get the recording and everything and all in that space. It's just going to my computer, which is very low attendance, and then I'll upload it to the other one. I might even do some editing eventually, but definitely glad to have you here. Eris was kind enough to tell me about you and the music. And like I told you, I was actually impressed with a couple of things that you were involved in. And I love the fact that you incorporate different styles of music. Because I was listening, I was going like, he's got spoken word, he's got some jazz, he's got some hip hop, he just got all kinds of music. So I was already impressed in that fact and everything. So I guess the first thing that folks are going to want to know is where you are coming in from and all of that. Because I know Eris has some Hawaiian background, as do you. So folks are probably going to be wondering about that Hawaiian background and about your musical background. So if you want to share some of that, I'm sure folks would be very much interested in that part of your life story.
Well, right now I'm based out of Kauai, Hawaii. I've been here for the last 3 years. I've been here, came here before COVID.
Wow.
So moved here before COVID. I've been all over the United States. I'm very well traveled. But I appreciate your, you obviously have taken a listen to the record. Getting a chance to show some of the influences there. I have to credit my producer. He's a big part of that sound that you hear. Him and I work together to collaborate and make that sound what it is. Yeah, so issue I'm a Beast or Stephen Henley Jr. Out in Las Vegas. I have to give him a lot of credit for the eclectic sound that you hear, but it's something that him and I kind of worked together on to develop a new sound. We only had 6 tracks on that EP, but I think there was about 50 different tracks. So he scrapped it. I want to say probably 2 dozen times, trying to find a different sound. That's what producers do. They try to find a sound that's different, and they fuse a lot of different sounds together to create something new and innovative. And that's something that we were kind of looking at on this particular project.
That makes a lot of sense. Were you always very much involved in that musical space, or were you somebody that was a musical product at a young age, or is this music something that you discovered late in life? Because one of the things I noticed
Um,
about you was that whole journalism background, and I'd love to have some conversation around that as well. But definitely that whole notion of being involved in music, I was wondering whether it was something that came to you at a young age or something that have developed at a later age in life.
I've always had an affinity for music. Probably, I don't know. Since I guess I really got fascinated with the saxophone when I was a kid. I did not get the chance to play it. I'm kind of a dropout saxophone player, as they say. I did not really get a chance to play it, though. I did come up with somebody who was extremely successful saxophonist. I started with somebody, in middle school that ended up being, making a career as a jazz musician in the Chicago jazz scene. But I did not continue to pursue it. That's something that I wanted to do. My sports journalism kind of took over, even though my passion for music was always kind of in the background. I had a passion for sports, but I really burned out on it.
Mm.
I did sports journalism for so long. Sports is was such a huge part of my existence, still is.
Right.
That I quite frankly got tired of it and wanted to pursue something else. This is something that I've always had a passion for, was music and sports. That's pretty much it. I've never really, I've had other interests, I guess you could say. I've got quite an eclectic background, but music and sports have been the primary interest for me. I didn't really, I really hate sports in some ways because it's such a huge part of my life, but it's like I can't deny it being there and being such a part of my life. In some ways, I absolutely hate sports.
Yeah, I can understand that. People have told me that have gotten really involved in sports and really caught up in their sports life, how much it is really gotten on their nerves if they really got involved and were really there for a long time and all in that space. But I know one of the other things that I was curious about as I was learning more about your history and everything was definitely, we have two founders here on the Pod TV network, and they oftentimes talk about the importance of learning the business aspect of everything and learning financial aspects as well. They wish more of our school systems taught that in the school system, and I kind of agree with them on that. So and unfortunately, too many of our schools in the West have started to discredit, I won't say discredit, but don't give enough merit to sports and to definitely to our artists. And I was just wondering your thoughts around that, because it does seem like a lot of our school systems around the country are cutting out sports and cutting out definitely the music departments and other cultural arts.
Well, I think that sounds horrendous. First of all, that they would cut both of those programs, because they're such a big part of the development of not just kids, but just learning the nuances and the dynamics of teamwork. You learn how to get along with people, collaborate with people through both of those mediums, whether it be music or sports. You have to, in order to be successful, you have to be able to collaborate with somebody and be able to understand where another person's coming from, or maybe they have an idea and kind of be able to compromise. The other thing I don't think they teach enough about in schools, and I'm not an expert on the education system, so I want to clarify that right up top. But one thing I don't feel like they teach enough about is inner dynamics of building good relationships within the workplace, within you know what I mean, just treating other people with courtesy and respect, and those types of things. Again, I'm not an expert in those areas, so I don't want to speak too much on that behalf, but that's one thing that sports and music for sure kind of promote, at least as long as you're not worried about the bottom line, which unfortunately a lot of people in sports are only worried about one thing, and that's the W, and they don't teach kids all the other things that all the other lessons that they can learn, being involved with sports or being involved with music. The bottom line gets, has too much emphasis, I
No,
would say.
yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. That bottom line is sometimes too emphasized, and all along those lines. One of the things that I've always been admiring of around Hawaii, and I'm actually a fan of it even here in the Carolinas, is nature. And I'm looking in your beautiful backdrop and everything. So one of the things I was just curious about is in your own development, and I definitely will get to some of the music conversation as well, is how important has the support of nature, and definitely nature just being in your own life and your own development. Is that something that you try to spend a lot of time in, is enjoying the benefits of that mother nature? Because like I said, I'm seeing this beautiful yard of yours in the backdrop.
Initially, no. When I first came to Kauai, I was a city person. I did not come here for the beautiful landscape. I could have cared less. I could have cared less at all, but has how it's kind of changed over time. I've learned to appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy it now. It's seeped into my music, but that's not what I came here for. I came here strictly for my career. I came here strictly to advance my career in sports journalism. I could care less where the locale was. And then, after that, and I've always had the music career as well,
Right.
on the side as well. But yeah, no, I could have cared less about it initially. Now I'm thankful I have it, and I've learned to appreciate and harmonize with it. But that was not initially any of the draw here at all.
No, I understand. One of the other things that I know, and I've talked to musician friends of mine, both here in the Carolinas as well as other places, is they sometimes get frustrated. But I think the pandemic actually opened it up, and definitely Clubhouse and some of the other rooms that are out there have opened it up as well. But there was a long time frustration with the corporate aspect of the music industry, because we do know that for a long time there was a few radio stations that were in control of things. There were a few concert venues that were in charge of things, and it was definitely making it harder for the musician, and particularly the independent musician. But it does seem like things that have opened up, even though some people have been frustrated by even some of those outlets like Spotify and Tidal and others. But I was just wondering your thoughts and whether the pandemic has opened up music for you.
Prior to the pandemic, I've been in music since 2006 in one capacity or another. Prior to the pandemic, though, and even after the pandemic, I still say, regardless of the situation, and I don't want to sound like I'm, completely cynical, but I understand that the majors will always have control over everything. Corporatization. I'm not a fan of corporatization, by the way, but or the corporate engine. I don't support the corporate engine either, but like it or not, they're always going to have the bulk of the revenue, and we're going to be the bulk of the industry in which they pretty much capitalize on. They'll probably take a lot of the ideas of the indies, etc. And it's very hard to break through as an indie without a lot of capital anyway. So those are two separate universes. I kind of draw a parallel to the 1%, the Zuckerbergs, the Bill Gates of the world. When you're talking about the majors, you're basically talking about the 1% to people that don't, are an outside looking in on the world. Now the indies, because of the way distribution changed and the streaming outlets changed, it's like they got the major label distribution, so now that they can have their voice to the world, or distribute to the world, they got major label distribution, but then they saturated the marketplace too on the same token. So it's harder than ever for indies to get across, because there's so much good talent out there, if that makes any sense. So in some ways they diluted it, but they gave us the dream, right?
Yeah.
So I hope I'm not too cynical there.
Oh, no, not too cynical at all. I can definitely agree with a lot of the things that you were saying. Actually, the vast majority of what you're saying, I can definitely relate to that, and definitely having come from the world of both print media as well as having done some radio and other things. And I've seen how they have influenced both of those industries and all along those lines. By the way, coming back to the sports journalism as well, just for a second, were you primarily doing things in the newspaper part of sports journalism or TV, or what kind of the aspects of sports journalism were you doing for those folks that are watching that don't know about Blasco and Blasco Says?
Well, the majority, almost my entire career has been newspapers. I started in newspapers when I was a kid. I'd been writing since I was a teenager. So, my majority of my career has been in newspapers. So I'd seen all the different changes, in newspapers. And then I got involved with the business aspect of music probably about 2010. I should have never went back into the newspaper industry in between 2010 and 2011. That was the biggest mistake I ever made.
Wow. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. And know there's some mistakes I have made in my career too that I can definitely relate to when you have that
I hate the newspaper
aspect
industry. I just want to get that out there. I hate the newspaper industry.
I
I don't hate the actual journalism, but I hate the business of it.
Right. Is it because of the divisive nature of what has become the newspaper industry with all of this kind of divisive reporting, or is it just kind of the fact that a lot of the small newspapers and independent newspapers have been taken over by some of those corporate entities in the newspaper field as well?
Well, I think it's a reflection of society over a period of time. I'll try to answer this in a couple of different segments. Right. But first of all, you have with the newspaper industry, you have they made a lot of their money on small businesses initially. Mm-hmm. I'm talking probably up until maybe the mid 90s. That's kind of arbitrarily speaking, but and their revenue was good up until about maybe 2003. And they're still, the fact that the newspaper industry is dying is pretty much a lie. But, because it's still, obviously they still make a lot of money off of it.
Right.
But they made a lot of money on their small businesses. One particular corporation that killed the newspaper industry was Walmart. Mm-hmm. Walmart did not buy inserts from the newspaper industry for the longest time. And obviously they put out a lot of the small businesses that we made a lot of money on through advertising revenue. They pretty much destroyed a lot of our revenue streams. And I don't know if that was, we were just a casualty of that, or if that was by design. And then, I've seen a lot of other changes come through the pipeline where a lot of these other papers get shut down over the years.
Oh, yeah. Were you an athlete yourself? And were there favorite athletes that you had? I know in some of our pre-interview, you were talking about some of our North Carolina athletes, but I was wondering about yourself, whether you were an athlete in school and whether there were favorite athletes of yours that you had the privilege of even covering.
I was never an athlete. I played basketball for many years on the recreational level. My grandfather was a basketball player at the Division I level. Oh. He got to play against some pretty historic players. He played against Jackie Robinson when he was at UCLA. Oh, wow. And then he played against George Mikan, who was the original big man of the NBA. That was when he was at DePaul University. And he played for a mid-major. Well, now it's a mid-major. At the time, it was probably a major. Bradley University. He was a player for them for 5 years. He played with Squeaky Gene Malchori, who was the top NBA draft pick. I want to say in the 52 NBA draft, something like that. He was banned for life for the NBA because he took money from bookies to shave points in the NIT tournament, in the 1950 NIT tournament against CCNY, which is a historic team.
Right.
They won the NIT tournament. The NIT tournament back in those days was equivalent to what the NCAA tournament was. So if you were in the NIT tournament, that was the tournament to be in. And they were in the championship game, and he shaved some points against CCNY and basically threw the game so that CCNY could win the championship by shaving points. But I obviously he had a price on his head if he didn't follow the rules. But it cost him his NBA career.
Wow, that's
Squeaky
amazing.
Malchori.
Yeah, that's amazing. You said your grandfather had a chance to play with him and everything. Were either of your parents involved in either sports or music that might have influenced some of your background as well?
My parents weren't. First of all, I was adopted, so I've never actually even seen a picture of my biological parents. So my parents weren't into like sports or anything like that. My family was. Obviously, my grandfather played Division I. My uncle played at Arizona State. He was a football player. My other two uncles or my one uncle and cousin were both swim coaches.
Okay.
So so they were pretty heavy into sports. So I would say I came from a pretty heavy sports. And then my cousin Ben Runkle, he was really big into hip hop. He actually went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Okay.
And he started a rally over there called Hip Hop Generation as a Movement. And he had a panel where he taught the 5 elements of hip hop.
Right.
He had graffiti and DJs, and he turned this into a big concert and rally at the same time. And he got about I want to say, arbitrarily speaking, got about $200,000 or $300,000 to do all this. He had like Chuck D, who was a big advocate of Napster at the time.
Right.
Africa Bambaataa, who this was before he got into a lot of his legal trouble, but he's still definitely a pioneer and a legend, and he always will be. When he was the guy who probably most notable for Planet Rock.
Right.
Planet Asia. He had TJ Tony Touch. Wendy Day from the Rap Coalition was there. She's the one who is rumored to buy Eminem's plane ticket to the 1997 Rap Olympics. That's how Eminem allegedly got discovered by the Interscope intern and ended up, helping Dr. Dre launch his label.
Right.
So yeah, he was really heavy into it. And then I have another cousin who was a director in Hollywood. So
wow, yeah, definitely some family.
He got to direct the Golden Girls.
Oh wow.
And I think he did Fuller House as well.
Oh wow, so definitely some family members with some strong connections and everything. As I was listening to your music, I was also hearing, and I think I told you this before, that the radio station that my parents founded in the late 70s and stayed on for about roughly 10 years and stuff was a jazz station. I definitely have a love of blues, but also a love of jazz. And I was noticing that some of your cuts also had a love of jazz in them as well. So I was just wondering, when did you develop this affinity for jazz music and some of the other roots music that are out there, and not just the hip hop world? But it also seems like you have some affinity and some love for some of the more historical musics as well.
I have to give credit to my producer for that.
Okay.
He's the one that cultivated that sound. Now I don't have a huge historical reference on jazz or some of that music. Now, interestingly enough, I was listening to a podcast called Just Two Black Brothers podcast, which I was also a guest on. But they had Dr. Dre, not the producer Dr. Dre, but Dr. Dre from Yo MTV Raps.
Right.
And gosh, to me, he's just as historic as the producer. He's the one. He was probably bigger than the producer. At one time, obviously with the things that he did with Yo MTV Raps, but he had some interesting perspectives on music. One of the things that really caught my attention or drew me into his interview, his favorite rapper, Ella Fitzgerald.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting, because I was like, wow, that's somebody who really, really has taken the time to listen to everything, and has this historical perspective. And then he also mentioned Luis Costello from Abbott and Costello was a rapper, which I never really thought about that from that perspective. So I listen to some jazz, but I'm not really that big into, I don't have that like depth of catalog or anything. That's not something I listen to frequently.
Well, if I'm guessing, and this is just my guessing, like to put words in the man's mouth since I was not there when he was having this interview, but as a somewhat historian of music myself, I'm thinking that he was probably thinking that scat and some of the other musical styles were the precursors to some of the things that we even hear in modern day rap. And he was probably also thinking about the message aspect of definitely some of that jazz music, because definitely I can think of even Strange Fruit, which dealt with lynchings and stuff along those lines, which Billie Holiday did as being almost like a rap lament and all in that space. And there were even some early Robert Johnson and other blues artists. If you listen to them, they were definitely doing the same thing that blues artists do. And another form of entertainment that I also see that is part of your background as well. And I definitely want to hear your thoughts around that. But definitely it seems like those were early precursors to things that our other folks are doing now in the 21st century. But as I was reading, and I know that the Hayti Heritage Center, which is a place that I work at, an African American Cultural Arts Center here in Durham, they have a very robust spoken word community. And I did see that you have some spoken word, and I also heard that in your music as well. I did hear some people that were doing spoken word, including some what I would call is interpretation spoken word, because I think there's one song where they are actually having somebody that is not even here on the planet anymore, and it's kind of a rap as to what their conversation would be. That was actually some music that dealt with the legendary reggae artist Bob Marley and all of that. But I just wanted to know a little bit about your background with spoken word and how that came into your experimental music also.
Well, first of all, my first exposure to like that genre was about 7 years ago.
Okay.
I came into it with I had an artist who was a guest on one of my albums called Space the Rainbow, which came out in January 26, 2016.
Right.
And her name was Kate. Well, she went by the name of Kate Tempest. Now she's Kay. I don't know why she changed her name, but anyway. And I really started listening to her catalog after she was a guest on my on my feature record, and really started to get into a lot of the things that that genre. I think that's when I kind of decided to kind of transition into something a little different. I had a lot of things that I was going through personally on this record. And it was almost like therapy for me to kind of get it out. I still need to probably do another 3,000 records for how I was feeling at the time. But, when I did this record, but anyway.
Yeah. And you've also had the pleasure of having some amazing guest artists on your albums, and I imagine that part of that is through the producers as well. But you definitely had Cassidy on one of the records that you've done. Excuse me, in the past.
Cassidy's was not on my record. He was on one of the records that I executively produced, or I have production credits on. But he was not on. Just to clarify, he was not on one of my records. But Cassidy is obviously a legend, or at least he's a legend in my book. I don't know how many people in hip hop or rap would consider him a legend, but to me, he's up there. Now he was on V-Neck's Robin Hood, I believe.
Right.
So.
And it looks like on that same album was an artist that has sometimes been a legend, but has also had his notoriety as well, because it also looked like you had the pleasure or maybe displeasure of working with R. Kelly and Trina as well. So definitely I was seeing that when I was
R. Kelly was R. Kelly was like a combination. That was a vocal sample, so that was mostly R. Kelly's estate. But we did a song with him where he's on the chorus. It's called "After Partying." Now that was through my producer, where he was able to get Kel's estate, and we got that all through, cleared through BMI. Now, one thing I learned from my producers: we never publish a record until we get the clearance.
Right.
So everything that I've ever published, we did all the due diligence to make sure everybody got the percentage points, or went through the agency of an agency called Harry Fox, to make sure that we got any samples or any kind of vocal, stuff that we got from different DJs, etc., cleared with their estate. And in other words, we made sure they were going to get paid if any of these records took off too. So
yep. And I know that with the the rainbow effort and everything, you did have a person that is known in the television world in that one. So I was wondering, how did you manage to get Wanda Sykes in this whole interlude on a song that's apparently called "That's So Gay"? And I did have a question about politics and art for you as well, but definitely I just wondered about the kind of involvement.
That was through my producer. We had a combination of skits and interludes. I'm not really a fan of the skits and interludes on my record. That was mostly my label. I really did not like the majority of those skits and interludes. The album actually sounds better through itself without the skits and interludes on it. I didn't really even care for the skits and interludes. That had nothing to really do with my creative control over it, because I only had so much creative say in it. Some of my label, kind of controlled a lot of that.
Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and definitely labels do have that control, even if they're small labels, and they will add some thoughts as well. How important do you think it is for artists to use? Because I definitely know we saw that even during the Roe versus Wade debate and the Black Lives Matter debate. But how important do you think it is for artists to use their platform in order to help make statements of a political or social justice stance? Because I know that there are a lot of people that talk about this notion of artist activists, but I was just wondering your thoughts around that, and whether it's something that you think artists should do, and do you try to do it in your own music and art?
I supported in 2016, obviously, was a big advocate of the LGBT movement. But one of the things that I put an emphasis on there was I was not just the LGBT movement, but equality for all people, all races, regardless. That's kind of something that's important to me. But as far as like me taking like a stance on something like super political, like outside of what I did, like, I don't know, I'm not that big of a fan of it, because it's like I'm not a politician,
right?
I will use the platform I have to send certain messages, but I'm not gonna, I don't want to listen to it. I don't think it's gonna sell that many records, unless it's the right movement. Obviously LGBT was something that will sell records, but all this other stuff, leave it to the politicians.
They let the politicians handle the political matters and all of that, and I can definitely respect that attitude and that opinion and all. What is the case of Circe all about? And I definitely want to get to validation and all of that, and what you were going for in those titles, but definitely I'd love to know more about the title and how it came about, and what it was all about when you were creating it back in about 5 or 6 years ago.
This is going to be funny, because I didn't really have much to do with that project. I didn't even know that project came out until my label put it out. They were basically throwaway tracks from my album that didn't make the cut from Space the Rainbow. My producer even doesn't even like that record. He claims he didn't have much to do with it. He said mostly interns did it or whatever. I don't really know. Like, I didn't have any involvement with that. My label put that out without me even knowing it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just curious about it.
So I don't really have a big emotional connection to the case for Cersei Mason. And CIPI stands for confidential informant. Which it was kind of a spoof on me. My producer always used to say, "Oh well, you know, you're an informant or whatever." Like, whatever. I really don't have any connection with that album. My producers even called it, I'll keep it PG, but a pile of crap. So how do you think I feel when your own label's telling you, your record's mediocre, or piece of what.
Yeah, that would not be something that you want to hear from your label, and for them to just kind of like put out. But I've seen other labels do that as well. Sometimes with success, sometimes not with success. Because I've even seen historically some B-sides of records that actually did better than the record that was supposed to be the hit. Not often, but it has happened on occasion, even as far back as the 60s and the 50s, from what I understand of music history and all along those lines. But definitely, some of this latest stuff you were doing during COVID-19, and a lot of people were using this as a time to do what they call woodshedding or workshopping, or a number of other terms that people might use to say that they are fine-tuning their talents when we were more secluded, and more people are getting out and about,
I always
getting
thought
and
that
doing
was I always thought that was funny, because I've always done my thing regardless of what's going on in the world. I'm not going to let the world dictate my life. I still did my newspaper stuff, and I was still doing my music stuff all through, got to, this has always been what I've done. So it's not like like COVID-19 was something that even, this is my fourth studio album. I was also executive producing an album, V-Nex Robin Hood came out in December 27, 2011. So it always tripped me out. I'm like, I'm not going to let the world dictate, what I do. Like, I don't care what's going on in it. I'm going to do my thing regardless. So
did it impact any of your live concerts though? Because I do know friends of mine, and even to a degree myself, was impacted because some of the festivals also decided to close shop and or go into
not
virtual
really,
and
because I'm
live.
not really, because I'm not much of a live performer. So yeah.
So you didn't find yourself doing more virtual
I was more considered a utopian experiment by my producer anyway. So yeah, I'm not much of a live performer.
Gotcha. So yeah, that would definitely impact, and all along those lines. Do you think that if the album becomes more popular, that you will try to push yourself into those festival grounds and into doing
Well,
more live performances, or is this just not part of the music aspect that you are hoping to do that much of? Because I do know some people that are made a living and have been quite successful as being only kind of that experimental musician that you hear on the radio, or you might see on television, or you might hear in the other kind of venues, but you're not necessarily going to go to a concert to hear them because they are in that experimental lane.
I'm never going to be a headliner. I'm aware of that. So I don't have any kind of delusions or grandeur. I'm using this primarily to build my songwriting catalog, because I'm also a publisher with BMI. So, but at the same token, because my goal is to get placements with major artists, well, I'm going to start with myself and work on my craft, even though I consider myself a novice as a songwriter.
Right.
Even though I've probably got more credits than established musicians, but and you know what I'm saying? Like, if you look at my BMI songwriting credits, they'll attest to that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like I was saying, I do want to do more of that stuff, but more in like a spoken word kind of, you know what I mean, more intimate setting. I'm not gonna rock arenas. And if I do that, I'll also probably shave ice as well while I'm doing it at these different venues, so that I can make a little bit of side income as well, because that's another trade that I know.
Gotcha. And that's an interesting trade. I've definitely got to learn more about that and everything, because that's not something that people have as a common trade and all of that. But do you see yourselves possibly even blending the two? Because as you were talking about that, and as I'm thinking about some of those experimental sounds and where I hear those experimental sounds, is sometimes in the sports venues, because I've actually got a friend of mine who is an improv comedian, and he actually has a show on the network that I help with called Gamers Den, which is about the video game industry, because he is also an avid video game person. But he is the voice of the Durham Bulls. And as a sports journalist, you know that the Durham Bulls is a major minor league team that also had a movie about it and all of that, that being the movie Bull
I
Durham.
did
And
not.
all,
Oh, Bull Durham. Yes, that I was just about. You know what's weird? You know what's strange? I've actually watched some Bull Durham clips the last couple of days. It's really weird, but I've never actually seen the full movie.
yep. And it was actually shot at the old stadium. They're in a new stadium, and they've been there for several decades, because that movie is actually relatively
But
old and
one
all
thing
of
that
that.
I
But
did
they,
notice by watching snippets of it, that's so strange because it just kind of coincidental, but that they did have real life minor
Mhm.
league uniforms.
Yep, yep. And they were in a real life minor league team. That team has actually done quite well and won the Governor's Cup and a couple of other titles, and have done quite well over the last several years. One or two of those years were kind of cut short by the whole pandemic, and in one case, I think totally canceled, if I'm remembering correctly. But that being
Right.
said, I do know that Jacoby has used his improv as being the voice of the Durham Bulls, and when they're doing what I call the antics, and every sports team has them, which is kind of like, in their case, it's the run of the bulls, sumo wrestling, and some other kind of things that are going on in between the innings. And that even happens in Major League Baseball as well, and all of that. So I was wondering, have you thought about bringing some of that musical aspect, particularly the experimental musical aspect, into, like, say, a NHL or an NFL game or an NBA game, and has any of those conversations taken place, or maybe you've already done that?
I would love to get my I'd love to get my songs played in those arenas because those are nice BMI check. But I did do one song on my LGBT in 2016. I touched base a little bit on. I did the chorus on Michael Sam with another LGBT artist named Cakes Tequila, and that's actually one of my favorite songs. That initially I did not like the way my chorus was, but the way it was laid out and designed with Cakes saves the song because he's just so good at what he does. But the entire song is very unique. Same thing with the LGBT anthem song, which that's kind of an interesting scenario. But anyway,
Have you
with
teamed up with any of the other great LGBT artists? Because I do know that even here in this area, we have a group called the Muslims, and I know that St. Clair Palmer and I believe Charlotte Ammons are part of that, and there are some other groups that are on national tours that are part of that community, and sometimes they will even perform together, and sometimes they'll just perform with other indie artists that aren't necessarily in the same community. So I was just wondering, have you looked into those kind of possibilities as well?
Cakes is probably one of the most well-known LGBT artists. Azalea Banks is on one of my albums as well. She was on Twan Up's on August 4th for a song called Bieber. I'm trying to think off the top of the dome. Like I said, Cakes Tequila and Azalea.
Yeah, you would love this event that they actually formed here, and is actually formed partially by members of the LGBT community, but it is also an environmental cause, and it's also a play on words and reclaiming names and all of that. So this is more from the women side of that part of the community and everything. But I do know that they have here in North Carolina a thing called the Beaver Pageant, and the Beaver Pageant is literally folks that are dressing in various beaver outfits, so they look like the real animal and everything, but then they have a theme with it. So it might be a space beaver, or it might be a astronaut beaver, or it might be an Indian beaver. And then they have this whole pageant where you get to bribe the judges, and it's just hilarious and all of that. As a matter of fact, I think they just did it either last month or the month before, because I know it's usually in May or June, but it is truly hilarious and is a great community event. It's become a very popular community event over the last several years. And like I said, it raises money.
I never heard of it before, but that sounds very interesting. Yeah.
You have to check it out. This is quite fascinating. We do some interesting things here in Durham because we're also the city that actually And I knew some of the organizers that actually helped with the organization of it. We actually married our city. So yes, they had an event that was maybe about 5 or 10 years ago, and then they did a renewing of the vows, and people have talked about renewing the vows again. And then that actually got picked up by other cities. Because I think Seattle did one after we did it, and a couple of other places. But it was like taking vows to make your city better in different ways. So, you're taking a vow that you will help be nice to your neighbors, that you will do better with the environment. There were a number of vows that were part of that, but it was run just like a real wedding. There was actually a real minister that was there as well that exchanged the vows with the people. And it was another great community event. Only ran, I think, 2, maybe 3 times, but there has been talk of bringing it back and all of that nature. So some of those campy things that are done can be quite hilarious and quite fun as well.
I'd like to see more people actually do it instead of talk about it. Different things like just being kind to people, etc. I think it sounds good, but on paper, but how many people actually go out and actually follow through on that stuff? They get caught up in the hustle and bustle of their day, etc. And I think we forget our manners too much.
No, we totally forget our manners. It's interesting you said that, because my dad, who is a visual artist, more doing installation and photography, a variety of styles of art. But one of his installation pieces was actually a renegade piece where he has like the fire alarm, the pull the alarm symbol and everything. And inside of it is a placard that he put in there as well. And it's basically in that placard is the words thoughts and prayers, because part of the thesis of his artwork is just what you said, that too many people will, and whenever there is a disaster, whether it's like a hurricane disaster or 9/11 or whatever that impacts people, and I'm sure we even saw it during COVID, folks will give their thoughts and prayers, but won't put any action behind the prayer. So that's why he did this installation piece that became somewhat notorious and somewhat famous in this part of the area, because folks were having conversations with him about what that was all about. And like I said, the notion is that we give too much placades to people, but not really put the actions behind it, which is kind of what you just alluded to.
What's interesting, the more I talk to you, and I'm gonna definitely have to pay a visit to North Carolina now. I'm getting intrigued. What's intriguing to me, the more I talk to you, is that sounds like North Carolina is a very eclectic place.
Very much so.
And so,
particularly in this part of North Carolina.
And so that sounds very intriguing to me. I'm just maximizing my window here. 1 second. But that sounds very intriguing to me. To your area, it sounds like a very multicultural area, which is really probably interesting to live in and observe from the perspectives that you've been able to observe it from.
Oh yeah, totally. Very much interesting and intriguing and all of that. How important do you think it is, and how much were you willing to be identified as that whole notion of eclectic? Because I do know I don't mind being called that, but I know some other people that are sometimes taken by affront when people call them eclectic or eccentric or a number of other terms that are out there. So was it a term or terminology that you were always willing to accept, or is it something that had to grow on you?
I'd accept it, but I don't know if I'd call myself that eclectic. I think there's a lot more people that are well read and more cultured than I am, out there. I mean, I've lived in 10 different states in the United States, but I wouldn't even consider myself that eclectic, to be honest. I don't think that it's just not. It's not that I wouldn't embrace the term, but I think there's a lot of people that have a lot more, background and life experience than I do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and all of that. Like I said, I was going to get to the album that you have got out there now. So what is valediction, and what is the whole notion of valediction in your mind? And what are some of the things that you think folks should be paying more attention to on this particular latest release and all of that? I'm loving some of the titles like Drop Baby Drop.
I appreciate you asking me about that, because like I said on a couple of the previous podcasts, it was more about a lot of and they did a great. First of all, I don't want to think that I'm putting them down, but they did a great job, but they didn't really ask me a lot about my record. So I appreciate you asking me about that, because it was more emphasis was on the features that I had, but I really appreciate that. Valediction is probably the most personal and organic record that I've done to this date. I feel like it's really starting. I feel like that I came into my own as a songwriter. By that, I mean, I'm not talking about skills. I'm talking about, I found my own voice. I found my voice, now I can work on all the nuances and the technical aspects. I mean, sometimes you can when you're talking about art, if you're able to get across and make somebody feel you, sometimes the technical aspects of certain things, aren't, always necessary. Bob Dylan's a good reference. He's not a great singer or even a good singer, but he sings from here, and that's where people feel him, same thing with Johnny Cash. I'm not drawing any kind of, parallel, because I know, what I'm saying. I know those are two different universes, but, so I'm not putting myself in those categories. I don't want that to get misconstrued.
Right.
But I came into myself because I spoke from here.
Mm-hmm.
Valediction is very, very important to me, as far as that is my life as you see it. It's kind of a snapshot into it. It's my life, it's my experiences, it's my emotions. That track that I have with Coco Charlie. Mm-hmm. It's about my verses on it. It's about losing somebody. It's about loss.
Right.
I went through. I lost two people in my life that were very, very important to me. First of all, I lost one of my business partners, and I have no idea where he went. We were gonna do a podcast, where we had legitimate investors behind it. Things got kind of misconstrued, and things just didn't work out. I'm gonna kind of leave it there, but It's about loss. I lost somebody, that I was getting to know, that I was, kind of, I've seen her, occasionally, and I really had a lot of feelings for her. I won't mention her by name, just out of respect for, her own privacy, etc., because she's not in the public eye as much as I am. I lost her too. I lost all of these people at about the same time, so it was really hard for me. I lost my status as a sports writer, and it had nothing to do with COVID, I don't think, but there was a lot of political dynamics within the newspaper. Things didn't go well over here. Right. I can get more into that if you want me to. I can. Yeah. I'm an open book on it. I was the person who became my boss did not treat me very well. Mm-hmm. Because there were some personal things. I don't think she took the fact that I, rejected her, coming on to me subliminally. I don't care if it's out there in the world, and I think I kind of took the brunt of that as she took over as my boss. I had to go through all of these different things, and, it was kind of trying to say goodbye to one chapter of my life, because I really didn't have any choice. Valediction is kind of a goodbye in a way, and I didn't really have any choice. Yeah. So I felt like I needed to cut another record. I talked to my label about it, and they were able to make that happen. And so that was a hard record to record, because I was going through so much at the time, just trying to transition and losing the status that I lost too. Yeah. As a sports journalist, you have kind of a certain status in the community, and I had to go through a lot of changes.
Yeah, it sounds like a whole lot of changes are being gone through. And a couple of things that you were saying is that you were talking is a lot of times, well, a couple of things crossed my mind. One is I can definitely relate to those job situations, and particularly those job situations where you feel that you are being shortchanged. Because I remember that I many years ago in the late 80s went to my one and only daily newspaper, and there was another person that was minority background of being African American and all of that was in that particular newspaper job, and I got the feeling that he liked being the the big fish in a small pond. So that being said, I did not felt that I got the encouragement that I would have probably expected for somebody that was also a fellow minority, and I also feel that he did the same with
Because
it.
he was probably trying to, he looked at you as competition.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Was he looked at me as competition and was trying to do things to undermine me and another lady that I believe was of
Because he's trying to
Hispanic
put
background.
himself on the pedestal. And so if he could wipe you out, yeah, I get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what I was.
I probably resonate with that pretty quickly. Probably you're probably surprised that I picked that up so quick, but yeah, you understand. Being in the newspaper industry was a hard road. I wish I had gotten rid of the newspaper industry in my life. Probably about in 2010, I was full time in the music industry,
Right.
and I should have never looked back.
Mm.
Even after the situation happened with the streaming company that didn't work out, because of rules of engagement, I'm going to, kind of keep the semantics of that short.
Right.
Like some people that know me really well, I've shared it with them, but I don't really want that on camera, everything that happened.
No, and like I said, I kind of because I had done a little bit of research, so I kind of alluded to it without going into details as well, because I was respecting your beliefs in that system. But yeah, there are certain kind of organizations that are not always favorable to the artists as much as people think they're favorable, and I'll just leave it at that.
This one I was more on the business aspect of it. We were doing a streaming company,
Mhm.
and I even got to go to South by Southwest, etc. But it just didn't work, for a number of different reasons. Not just, it just the whole thing kind of didn't quite. There wasn't enough continuity there. And like I said, because of rules of engagement, I won't get into all the semantics and the dynamics and the people in play, because I could go on for hours. But I'll just kind of leave it at that. But and then I went back after that happened. I should have, let's see, because I worked with Sincerely Collins.
Mhm.
I've always been in the music industry, but my other source of income, as most people, the old saying, don't quit your day job, you know what
Right.
I mean? But I was working with Sincerely Collins. I was helping him out after I left Crush Recording. I worked with Sincerely Collins, and we were on the Bruno Mars Billionaire video shoot.
Mhm.
He told me to interview Bruno Mars. I had no idea who he was. Maybe I remember him as a guest feature on the B.O.B. track, but I didn't. I was like, okay, I'm not impressed. I'm just being real.
Right.
And I'm like 65 feet away from him on Venice Beach, because they had like a tent over there and everything. I was just a tag along because Kyle won a thing on MySpace. At the time he went by Kyle Collins. That was his artist name until he became Sincerely Collins. He was also the front man of a band called Weird is the New Cool, which was kind of a reggae 311 type feel band, but Kyle made them unique.
Mm-hmm.
He gave them, because he was just such a charismatic front man. Anyway, we're on this thing. I'm just kind of tagging along here. I have my Puma backpack on. I'm just handing out Kyle Collins Seasons albums. I'm just talking with people on the beach. You know what I mean? I'm just kind of, and like I said, this happened. I think I'm trying to get the chronology right. I think I was still with the streaming company, but I was still working with Sincerely Collins. There was a lot of stuff going on, with the political dynamics of that,
Right.
But anyway, I was working with Sincerely Collins as his publicist and also living with him at the same time. And then, like I said, we did the Bruno Mars billionaire video shoot. As a matter of fact, if you watch that shoot, it was done in 2 different days.
Okay.
Because Travie McCoy, who was the other guest feature from a band called Gym Class Heroes, he got hit over the head with a skateboard.
Oh wow.
Yeah, they had to rush him to the hospital because he got doinked in the head by a skateboard. One of the skater kids, him and I wasn't there for this. Sincerely Collins actually was shooting a footage with him. I wasn't there for this. He got knocked in the head because he was talking trash with some of the local kids on the beach, and they said, "You watch your mouth. You're not from here."
Right.
And it turns out that they actually police escorted everybody off that beach. And you know what's interesting? There was only one blog that alluded to it. I told Kyle, call the LA Times now. We were trying to call the LA Times. We were trying to get a hold of an entertainment reporter there because, I didn't even realize this was going to be the biggest hit of the summer of 2010. I had no idea.
The reason I was chuckling is because isn't it ironic when we are in the right place at the right time, but we're not prepared? I'm gonna give you an example.
I wouldn't say I wasn't prepared. I just had no clue that.
And it's the same thing. I was going to give an example. I used to go regularly, and actually, I think that they just had it like the last week or two ago. But I used to go, and I won't say that regularly, maybe 2 or 3 times to the American Black Film Festival in South Beach, Miami. I mean, they used to hold it in the islands and a couple of other places, but I went at least 2 times, maybe 3 times when it was in the South Beach, and that's still where it's at even to this day. Like anything else, it got canceled a few times. But when LeBron was first being drafted as a high school kid and everything, was one of the last times that I went. So that was many years ago and all of that.
2003.
Yeah, 2003 and something like that. But LeBron was actually he was a high school kid. So we were down there watching the whole thing, and he went to one of those nightclubs because, as you know, South Beach is very popular for its nightclubs then and now and all of that. And we went there.
Draft him, but anyway.
We went there hanging out, and we were hanging out with the whole film festival. And of course, some of the film festival was at different nightclubs. I think Bed's was a popular one at that time. There might have been a couple of other ones that were popular also. But when we stopped by one of those clubs, LeBron was trying to get in. Now, remember, at this time, LeBron is still a high school kid, so he is technically underage. So he's not supposed to get in if you're following the rules. And the bouncer was going to follow the rules. So the bouncer was like, nope, you can't get in. His whole entourage was there. They were trying to, say, this is the #1 draft pick. He's getting ready to go play. I guess that was for the Cleveland Cavaliers, his first team and everything. So you need to let him in. He's important and all of that. And the bouncer was like, no, he cannot come in. And
my job is more important than you right now, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. My job is more important than you. And as it turned out, at one point, the bouncer proceeded to start taking off like his jewelry and some of the other things, because the bouncer was actually about the same height as LeBron and maybe a similar build, but he was a drag bouncer. He was definitely, he fit the bill, but he was dressed in drag and all of that. And I remember looking at my friend who was a TV producer, another friend who I'm close to, the guy that was the TV producer, who is now a professor at one of our local universities. And I'm still close with the other person. And we were going like, oh, we're in Miami. None of us have, and like I said, most of the time, one of us would have had a camera. None of us had a camera. And we're going like, oh, if we had had the camera, we could have got the picture and taken it right down to the National Enquirer and got our little check and everything. I mean, I think most of us had the ethics that we would not have done that, but it's still a good story to tell about how you can have those missed opportunities.
That would have been probably even more valuable in today's media climate. You talked about media. One thing that I don't mean to cut you off here, and I'll get back to what you were saying too. Because I got an interesting story about LeBron as well. Not from my personal experience, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. One of the things I don't like about media is that, and I know that this is the way the 1% or the powers that be want it, but the polarization of media, it's become the way things are reported, and the line between entertainment and facts are starting to get more and more blurred. I know convergence has been happening since the early 2000s, but I really hate how you almost have to cut somebody down or throw dirt on somebody to actually get any clicks.
Right.
It's like, how polarizing is that? I mean, we're already divided. So unfortunately, and
Yeah, I definitely agree. We're already divided, and definitely that is a major problem and everything. And we also get caught up in semantics and everything, because actually that's one of the things I was going to bring up, even about when you were talking about your loss, because as you were talking about the loss, you were talking about like the loss in the sense of lost relationships and lost kind of that space. If I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, when you first mentioned loss, I was thinking maybe because of COVID, maybe of other things that are going on in life, and the fact that so many of us have lost somebody in the sense that they're no longer on this planet. And I'm a big believer in being connected with our ancestors and everything. I was thinking of loss in the more traditional sense of loss, and then I was going like, wait a minute. So I think
COVID did not affect my life. I didn't let it affect my life.
Gotcha. And that's what I was picking up, that you didn't allow it to affect your life. And also the kind of losses you were talking about is more the loss of relationships where the people have left. And that is a very painful loss as well. Whereas I was thinking about like some of the relatives that I lost during COVID, and definitely some of the friends that I lost. And I know that that's a lot of times where people's mindset is when they hear the term loss. But that's one of them semantics things where people get it a little bit mixed, because I think both of them are valid.
It didn't affect me in the way probably it did for people on the mainland.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to sound like I'm ignorant. I paid attention to all of what's going on. A lot of times I try not to, because I get so worked up about things. Sometimes I actually have to take a break from reading stuff, because I get it really, really gets me worked up. So I have to take a break from reading things, because I can't take it. I never was a typical journalist. I was always a sports guy,
Right.
But I did pay attention to a lot of, the things going on in the world. I'm not naive by any means, but, I never was like somebody that was going to get hyped up about a story. I don't, why? Because if you get hyped up about a story, you shouldn't be covering it.
Right.
You're too emotional. If you're too emotional about a story, you cannot write it objectively.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
So I always tried to separate my emotions, even if I, and that obviously comes from my sports writing background. There's no cheering in the press box.
Mm-hmm.
First thing to learn. But yeah, if you're too emotionally involved with something, unless you're a columnist, that's a whole different genre of writing. Unless you're a columnist, you shouldn't be writing it.
No, I can definitely see that and everything. But did you feel that there were times, even in the sports world, where maybe you wanted to take a stand, or you thought about taking a stand? Because I'm thinking about, even in the sports world, the couple of things that came up recently, and I don't know what your views on them were. We're dealing with what you were just talking about, which is kind of this divisive nature, which is whether it's in sports world around the hiring of more African-American coaches and or ownership in the African-American and minority communities, because it's also come up with Hispanics and women owners as well. And also the whole conversation around whether you should kneel or shouldn't kneel, that Colin brought into the conversation as part of Black Lives Matter. And now he's still unemployed several years later and everything, even though there's speculation that he may come and get a job eventually.
I've always been an advocate for hiring minorities. I've been a big fan of the Minnesota Vikings forever. And they had a guy named Dennis Green.
Yes.
Who is probably one of the best football coaches that didn't win a Super Bowl.
I agree.
I really hate that Denny didn't win a Super Bowl. As a matter of fact, I got to meet him when I was a teenager. I got to meet him. I actually got his autograph on a football, him and Tony Dungy.
Okay.
So I've always been a big advocate. To me, they were just coaches. Right. I didn't look at them as African-American coaches. They were both great coaches. Tony Dungy won a Super Bowl. I wish Denny Green had. He should have been at least had a chance to win a Super Bowl or been in the Super Bowl in 1998, the year he drafted and took a chance on Randy Moss. They
Right.
went 15-1.
Yes.
And they fell short against the Atlanta Falcons, a game that should have never gotten away from them in the first place. But who knows what happens behind the closed doors.
As a diehard Vikings fan, you are speaking my language, because like I said, I am a diehard Vikings fan and have been even before Denny Green, because I was a fan ever since the Fran Tarkenton era. So,
but I guess that's an interesting conversation we probably have off camera sometime. But I guess seeing Denny Green, I got to meet him in Mankato, Minnesota, and I'll tell you, I couldn't be more of an advocate for minority hiring, because I've seen the success that he has, and why not? Minnesota was obviously on the cutting edge of that when they hired him in 1992. I think he preceded Jerry Burns, and like I said, why not?
Yep, I agree. And
what I don't want to happen is them just saying it, right?
Right.
Oh, well, we're gonna do something. Look at what we're doing. You know what I mean? As a PR stunt, or a way to get special interest groups off their back. And then turn around and fire the guy 2 or 3 years later. That doesn't really move much progress forward. I would actually want to do it, like I said, say what you mean, mean what you say.
No, I definitely.
I don't want it to be a situation where they're going, let's do this just to get the numbers up. You know what I mean? Like, just to appease people.
No, I can definitely agree with you on that and everything, because definitely that can be an issue if they just do it to appease folks and don't really back up what they're saying. Like you said, hire somebody and then a month or 6 months later or a year later, fire them and everything. And I have heard some people make that argument around the Supreme Court justice that just got picked and everything, because some people felt that they had been painted into a corner when President Biden had said he was going to pick somebody that was going to be a woman and an African-American woman at that. And I've had some friends that have said that they didn't necessarily know that she was qualified. Now, when I read it, she looked just as qualified as anybody else. So I think that she was a good pick, but I can also understand their argument, or at least part of their argument, even though I may not necessarily agree with it. And one thing that I was going to say about the Vikings is that my brother, ironically, is a diehard Bears fan, and I had a lady friend that is a diehard Green Bay Packers fan. So definitely some interesting family conversations that could take place with all of that going on. And then I've got other family members that are like the Cowboys and the Commanders, as they are now called, the former Redskins, and all of that. So definitely some interesting conversations.
Interesting that you mentioned that, because I'd like to mention the Redskins name. I actually did an article on this. The Redskins logo was a gift from the Blackfoot tribal nation in Montana.
Wow.
I want to get that out there, because everybody whitewashed it, but I want to get that out there because it was the logo. It used to be an R.
Right.
Logo is a gift from a guy named Walter Blackie Wetzel, who was the president of the Congress of Tribal People in the 60s. He broke bread with JFK, and he was friends with Jack Kent Cooke, who was the owner of the Redskins. He encouraged them to change the R to Chief Two Guns White Calf, who was the Redskins logo that you saw in the 80s. And, so he was also on the Buffalo Nickel from 1913 to 1938.
Wow. I did not know that. I learned something new today and everything. I do know that my alma mater, which is actually Marquette, changed their name as well, because they were the Warriors and now they are the Golden Eagles. But ironically, just as you just said, I forget which tribe it was. It might have been the Chippewas. They actually had somebody that was from one of those tribes in Wisconsin or Minneapolis that was actually the actual mascot. So, and he would do like a traditional dance at halftime and would actually encourage some of the cultural things. So that I actually felt was a fair depiction.
I actually learned more about the history of our nation through a lot of our mascots
Right.
from sports. That's kind of how I learned about some of history and geography as well. So I don't know. Like I said, I did an entire article on it. You can find it online. All you have to do is type in my name and the Redskins. But and I interviewed Walter Blackie Wetzel's family about this. So I've got a kind of a different historical perspective on that, as well as I talked to tribal leaders, and they emphasized this fact. It was interesting. They said no tribal leader has ever opposed the name or the use of those images.
Right. That's
And I used to live on a reservation. I was a sports editor on a tribal reservation as well, in Western Montana for 3 years. And I don't know how many people, tribal people or native people, would wear the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins logos.
Right.
It was a sense of, it was for some people, and I don't want to speak for all, but for some people, it was a sense of pride.
Oh.
Because if you look at the logo, it was Chief Two Guns Waika. That was on the logo of the Washington Redskins with the feathers, I believe. Now I don't want to be misspoken, but I believe the feathers represented Blackfeet tribal heritage.
Oh, well. You said you spent some time on a reservation, and actually I have cousins that are part of that culture very much and are involved in the powwows. Actually, one of my cousins competes regularly. So I just wondered if you ever had the pleasure of attending those and what your impression of those was.
I did not have a chance to do the powwows. I covered a basketball team, which the New York Times Magazine read one of my articles and decided to embed a reporter with this tribal basketball team. They were from the tribal town of Arlee, Montana, which is right outside of Missoula. And they actually followed them for an entire season. And what's interesting is they brought to the attention the suicide rates and the cluster of suicides that happen within the tribal thing or the tribal reservation, and also just what they brought out suicide awareness with this article. The New York Times Magazine did it. They did it from New York Times Magazine. With this article, they also brought out all the other issues that not just tribal people are facing, but just teenagers are facing in general. People didn't have any clue. Some of the issues that teenagers go through. I read an article somewhere that the age of 16 to 33 are the most stressed people in the world. That's the age. I want to say 16 to 33. Well, you don't really have too much control of your life at those ages.
You definitely don't have a lot of control of your life at those ages and everything. Come back just real briefly to the music aspect and everything. Do you like to be or categorize as a particular style of music? Because as I said, I did kind of mention the eclectic nature, and I've seen some other descriptions that talk about definitely your hip hop style and some of the other ways of being categorized. But I've heard other musicians. I've got a dear friend who is a funk musician, and he loves definitely falling within that category and wears it with a badge of honor. And I know some others that are blues musicians that wear it with badges of honor. But then I know other musicians that, including some famous ones, that don't like to be categorized and just like to say that they make good music. I believe it was a great jazz artist or a great blues artist that actually was asked that question, and that's what he said, was he did not like being labeled. And I can't remember who that particular one was. I don't think it was Miles, and I don't think it was Coltrane, but it was definitely one of those historical people and all along those lines. But what are your thoughts around the nature of being labeled either by your fans or by the society in general in the music genres?
I'm totally cool with of being labeled. If somebody if a listener or fans want to label me a certain way, I'm fine with that, because music is individual to the interpretation of the listener. So I'm cool with that. And do I want to label myself? Not necessarily, because then I feel like I could stunt my growth into the progression of actually making something that's innovative. I want to stay innovative. You know, I learned to be innovative or think innovatively from one of my former business partners, or business partners. I shouldn't say former, as he's always going to be, you know, a business partner, whether he's here or not at this particular time. So one of my business partners taught me how to be innovative. It's Kevin Stratton.
Mm-hmm.
He was the guy that you know, he singer, songwriter, composer, producer. This guy can do it all.
Right.
You know, he's phenomenal. Not only that, but he always taught me to think progressive, be on the cutting edge, think ahead of everybody else. Because he's done that his entire career, you know, going back to the 80s. You know, he was the guy who programmed the second generation DX7. He was the guy that did you know, the key parts for Van Halen's Jump, which a lot of people don't know that, you know, but he was the guy that, you know, was behind the scenes, because he worked as a product specialist for Yamaha. And so he had access to all of these musicians like Toto and Stevie Wonder. And, you know, he got to actually got to play with Stevie Wonder at a NAMM show, you know? So he's been innovative his entire career. And so if I label myself a certain way, this is how I feel. I feel like that stifles my creative process and development. Maybe I subconsciously pigeonholed myself, and I don't want to do that, because I want to be able to stay open-minded and be on the cutting edge of you know, different things. Now I had to kind of find a certain genre, you know, obviously, that I fit into for distribution purposes, because they will ask you on TuneCore, on Spotify, on DistroKid, whatever distributor that you use, you know, what's the specific genre. So you have to kind of find a box.
Right.
But do I want to label myself when I'm during the creative process of that box? Absolutely not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I've heard that from others as well, that they don't like to label themselves, and they like to be able to innovate and things of that nature. I know that many years ago, like back when I was in college, I wrote a column about the direction of the music industry. And that was my opinion way back then, and that would have been in the early 80s, that music was going to start blending together, and that the sounds would be more blended, that you would find like jazz blues and jazz rock and all of these kind of like blended sounds. And I'm actually thinking that kind of a prediction that I made some 30 or 40 years is kind of the direction that music has gone in, where there's a lot of people that are blending and kind of doing what you're doing. So it seems like you've almost done what I was saying was going to be more common, and I thought it was going to happen even faster than it has. But what are some of the things that you
first of all, I want to read that column. I would love to read it. If you have a copy of it or anything, I'd appreciate it if you send it over to me, because I'd absolutely love to read it. So I'm with you on this. I'm kind of disappointed.
Right.
I'm very disappointed in the direction of music and how it's gone. Maybe not on a commercial level necessarily. There was a band. They were signed to Interscope.
Mm-hmm.
They were called the Nux.
Okay.
KNUX, just for anybody that wants to Google it out there. Now they were doing some really, 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 really sick. And when I say sick, I mean that in a positive connotation. They were doing some really innovative stuff with blending. They were from New Orleans, so they had that eclectic mixture. They were blending like instruments and hip hop, and you know, and I'm like, so I'm like looking forward to seeing where this is gonna go. You know, I've talked to some people who wanted to try to tune me into Tyler the Creator.
Right.
I've listened to some of Tyler the Creator's music. I just it's just not my bag. I'm not gonna diss it. It's just I just wasn't really able to get deep into that catalog. I
Right.
wasn't feeling it like a Kid Cudi. I loved Kid Cudi really turned me on with that Day and Night track because he made something that could relate to everybody.
Right.
That was just universal. Um, you know, I liked what Weird Is the New Cool was doing with
Mhm.
on the indie circuit. I liked what Weird Is the New Cool was doing with Girls Love Fun Music.
Right.
Now that Kevin won't get the production credit for it. He should get the songwriting credit because he did compose it. I was there.
Mhm.
They took most of that stuff, and there was a lot of things in play, because he wasn't well, so he wasn't able to finish that project. So they took it to somebody in Geneva who worked with Jim Class Heroes producer.
Right.
But Girls Love Fun Music was mostly composed by Kyle and Kevin. Those were the two main composers of that. Kyle, doing all the lyrics, but Kevin helped with some of the compositions. I don't know how much credit, but at least 33 and a third, but anyway, Girls Love Fun Music was a great record. They were doing some really innovative stuff. I liked what the Urge did.
Right.
311 did some really interesting stuff, but I don't know. I don't know where they got their sound. They're from Nebraska, for crying out.
Oh yeah, an unusual place to be from, Nebraska. I'm going to give you three artists, and I just love to know four artists, and I just love to know your thoughts. One of you listening to their music. Well, most of them I think you would have listened to, but there might be some that I'm going to throw out there, and I just love to hear your thoughts around these four artists that are crossing my mind. One of them is I'll give you two first, which is Buddy Guy and Prince. And the other is, I'll get to them in a second because they kind of come from the world of rock and hip hop. But definitely, I was wondering your thoughts around Buddy Guy and Prince. If you've listened to any of
I
their
have not
music,
listened to much of Buddy Guy's music. I'm not a big blues jazz guy. I'm
Right.
just not. And I think that's maybe because of probably the era I was born in.
Right.
But Prince, I love some of Prince's records. He was an innovator. He's always been on the cutting edge. I know he had so many problems that probably led him to an early death with his
Right.
publishing. Because he thought he could own his records.
Right.
Just absurd, by the way. That's why he changed his name to a symbol. That's probably why he died early. Whatever happened there, he probably had a little bit of what Eazy-E was going experienced with Suge Knight and all of those guys, or whatever happened, that led him to an early demise. But you cannot take from the machine.
Mhm.
You just it's not realistic once you get that big, and he thought he could do it, and look at what happened.
Oh yeah. And speaking of somebody else that was part of that machine or tried to fight the machine and everything, that was the other names that I was just gonna throw at you just because they popped into my head and everything. But I was wondering your thoughts around B-52s and around Gil Scott-Heron. And I know that those are two different folks from two different styles of music.
I like some of the B-52s records. That was obviously they were kind of at the peak when I was very, very young, and then they kind of disappeared. The other artists, I have no idea.
Yeah, Gil Scott-Heron is actually seen as like one of the early forefathers of hip hop and all of that, but definitely he has done some interesting politically oriented songs. He did one that was very popular called "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," which was talking about even some of the things that we're going through now as a divided nation and all along those lines. But he was doing it in the 70s because there's some allusions and some spoken word reference.
I'll have to check that out. I don't really have any reference to him.
Okay, that's no problem. And all along those lines, one of my musician friends has oftentimes talked about the importance of music as a unifying force, because he oftentimes, and I've heard this from a couple of people, will talk about how even though we've mentioned a couple of times that political divide, that if you go to a concert, if you are a fan of that music, you could care less whether the person next to you is white, black, or green, or gay, or straight, or animal, or person, as long as they're sitting there enjoying the music and all along those lines. But I was just wondering your thoughts around music as a unifying force and a force to heal people and the nation in general, and the world in general.
You really said something that resonates with me. I don't know, you just struck a chord there, because that's why I like really liked music in the first place, because I've always had trouble communicating with people
Mm-hmm.
in general, or understanding or relating to people. As you've probably gotten a chance to know me, or at least a snippet of me here,
Right.
I'm a very different kind of cat.
Right.
And so I've been that way since I was a little boy. I've always marched to the beat of my own drummer and
Mhm.
everything. I've never went with a flock, you know. But music was one way that I could actually communicate and relate and build relationships with people, and it was I think it was a way that I could communicate. Same with sports, because it was so universally relatable. And those are two areas that, it really doesn't matter. um Nobody ever talked about, well, they probably did, but nobody ever talked about Michael Jordan's race.
Mhm.
Or, that wasn't a big issue when you first, that's not the first thing you think about when you think of Michael Jordan.
Right.
He's the best basketball player of all time. People that have no idea anything about basketball at least knows his name or his symbol, or something of his likeness.
Mhm.
But nobody ever talked about, Jordan's race. I felt like especially, sports, it didn't matter. Now press is the way press is reporting things now, or media, I say media
Right.
is reporting things now. It's almost polarizing, and it's almost taking us back a step. I feel like we made a lot of progress in the 80s and 90s with racial relations,
Mhm.
and now it seems like it's more out in the forefront and in your face, and I feel like it's being more polarizing than it is helping people now. I understand that's probably the way the 1% or the wealthy want it, but it does suck to live through it and see it, digressing instead of progressing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. You mentioned it earlier, just talking about
Very
people that,
disappointed in it.
yeah, you
So
mentioned
I'm
earlier
very
just talking about people's jobs and their work environments and things of that nature. And I would say the same even with sports, but definitely with the music, that a lot of times you have to keep that day job or get that side hustle. So for those that are trying to make it in the music business, what is your advice to them in order for them to be able to survive as musicians and or sports reporters? Because I do know that quite a few of my musician friends might also be working at Uber or Lyft or DoorDash, and some of my actress and actor friends might be still doing that stereotypical working at the restaurant in order to survive, and all of that, waiting for that quote unquote big break. And that is a very much of a media entertainment stereotype. But I was just wondering, is that something that we can get around, or do you think that it's just an inevitability that you're going to have those side hustles until you make it?
It depends on your tax bracket, or a number of different scenarios. But one thing I'd say to anybody that's aspiring to be in entertainment: make the sacrifices.
Mhm.
Don't just talk about it, do it.
Right.
Because that's going to make a difference. I make sacrifices, and to even be sitting here with you, I've made sacrifices. So make sacrifices. Stay true to who you are. However, whatever that means to you, find it. Because in order to make it to a certain level in this industry, or in order to get across, or in order to have a following, you got to be unapologetic, and you got to find your own voice. You got to have something that's yours and nobody else's.
Right.
Don't try to be a Drake. Don't try to be, me. I'm trying to be a successful songwriter. I don't have any delusions of grandeur. If I win a Grammy or not, I don't care. I want to sell records, make money,
Right.
and make enough money to make a nice living for myself. But I don't have, like, you know what I'm saying, like these you know what I mean, delusions of grandiose visions, that type of thing. I have to stay true to myself and find my own niche within the industry, because there's a lot of different people that make it in a lot of different ways.
No,
You
that
know,
makes sense.
Sincerely Collins is a good example. He's a great manifester.
Mm.
I've never seen anybody that's had more tenacity and makes his vision come to fruition more than Sincerely Collins.
Wow.
He never quit. He's had so many different adversities, trials, and tribulations, and he just came out with a new single with Young Buck.
Wow. So he still got all kinds of stuff that he's still doing on that regular basis and doing some amazing things in that space. That's
And
just
he's been doing it since he was 15 years old, making music in his grandfather's bedroom.
wow. So still doing that whole making the music in that connection, everything. How important do you think it is for musicians to have a connection to the past musicians, and who are some of those? You've alluded to some, but who are some of those that you would call your influences?
I'd have to say this is interesting, because I have a couple of different musicians I want to mention on here. I definitely want to get this one in. I have to say shout out to the Winstons.
Okay.
The funk and soul band that did "I'm On Brother" and "Color Me Father."
Okay.
Shout out to the Winstons. I got a chance to interview the Winstons before, or the Winstons frontman before he died. That was, unfortunately, I lost the tape. It was a phenomenal tape. "I'm On Brother" is the most sampled drum loop, 5-second drum loop in music history. Shouts out to Gregory, who did that. They were a funk and soul band in the late 60s under a small record label named Metro Media.
Yeah.
The other artist that I have to quote here, or I have to pay homage to, because every artist should pay some homage to this guy, which he's in the jazz genre. Thelonious Monk.
Oh yeah.
Thelonious Monk said, "I stood on the shoulder of giants," and that's on the back of a Downbeat magazine. That's a quote from Downbeat magazine.
And ironically, you'll be glad to know, because you were talking about the North Carolina connections. Thelonious Monk is actually another North Carolina artist, just like John Coltrane. He's actually from a little town called Rocky Mount, which is actually where my mom currently lives. But yeah, there's a lot of great jazz folks, including Nina Simone and a number of others, Roberta Flack, that call North Carolina home, and definitely gave great fame from this area, including some modern ones, because we had one that just ran for political office. I think he was running for a state senate, even though he lost, and that was Clay Aikens, who is still here not necessarily in Durham, but in one of our other cities nearby, and all of that.
I was supposed to interview Clay. Funny you mention that. I was supposed to interview Clay. I interviewed Lady Gaga before she was famous, but I was also supposed to interview Clay because he was coming out with a new record.
Right.
And this is right before he came out to the world,
Right.
And so that was actually put on hold, because I think they were going to give the exclusive to People magazine. So yeah, I was actually scheduled to interview him right before he came out. So that kind of got put on hold.
And a friend of mine,
I think Taylor Hicks instead.
Yeah, and a friend of mine was actually supposed to have Clay on his podcast, because he does a podcast around the funk music industry and everything. And he had actually had a conversation with Clay during the campaign, and that still may transpire, but he was trying to get it during the campaign season, and Clay's people and him never quite got their communications together. So it didn't happen during the time we thought it would happen, but who knows, it might still happen eventually. But definitely, I know some folks that have been trying to get him into interview. So it's ironic that you also had that missed interview, because I know that Zach has been trying to get that interview. I was trying to get it for several months. That
was supposed to happen with Dale Kawashima's singer-songwriter universe.com. And like I said, that was right around the time, and I think people paid a lot of money. I want to say it was People magazine. They paid a lot of money for that exclusive.
Yeah, that
because
makes a lot of
they threw him on the front of the cover for that exclusive. That was when he came out with his sexuality.
Yeah.
And so I was scheduled to interview him. That was, I want to say that was 2008.
Hmm. Wow, that would have been 2008. You would have got that interview and all of that. Have you done anything in that? Because we had a show that was on, and the young lady was out of. Speaking of American Idol, she was actually the winner of South African Idol, Alexandria May, and all of that. But she was part of that singer-songwriter round kind of system where a lot of people are doing that singer-songwriter kind of thing that is very popular in Nashville. I think it's popular in South Africa and a number of other places. But I was just wondering, have you tried to get involved in any of those kind of like rounds and these kind of like things where people kind of bounce singing off of each other in the kind of coffee house environment, or is that something that is not really your style, or that something of interest to you? Because I know there's a
get in the coffee house circuit, but I've never done any. I don't do competitions.
right. It's not so much a competition; it's more like they're just kind of listening and playing toward each other. So it's less of that competition kind of flavor. American Idol is a competition, but the singer songwriter is just them bouncing ideas off of each other, is the way that I've heard it described.
That's a cool thing. The one thing I don't want to happen is I don't want somebody else to take my concept or my structure, and the next thing I know, I hear it on the radio and it's got 20 million spins.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. You definitely don't want.
I gotta protect the business aspect of it, because I've always got to be writing for artistic expression, but I always have to remember to write for sales as well.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
so unless I get the songwriting credits, I don't want to be involved with some sort of lawsuit saying I own pieces of that song.
Right.
For instance, Kevin went through that with Neo because he wrote, he actually still probably has all the rough materials. He wrote the instrumentals for So Sick.
Wow.
And that somehow got to another company called Stargate in London. It ended up getting to Neo probably through a group called Tim and Bob. Which they were an R&B production duo. That's where our connection was.
Right.
Through they did Cisco's Thong Song. They worked with pretty much everybody in the R&B world. But I'm guessing that it just kind of got through the pipeline. He took about $400 for it, and the next thing he knows, it's one of the biggest hits out there. So I remember that came out in 2006. I remember when that CD hit the shelves, because Stevie K, who was the guy that we were involved with, we worked with. Stevie K brought that brand new the day it came out. And I remember seeing it because I was working with Kevin at the time, and I remember seeing that. And so then I found out the whole backstory on what was going on there. Because I remember he looked like LL Cool J. To me, that was how I interpreted the record front. I was like, is this LL Cool J's new album? You know what I'm saying?
Do you think that enough people get the business aspect of show business? Because I know even some of the old veterans don't necessarily understand the business aspect, and we do know that every good artist should have knowledge of what their lawyers are doing, their accountants, their managers, and even their publishers. But I was just wondering your thoughts as to whether enough of our artists, whether they are established or non-established, understand the business aspect of show business.
No, not a chance. There's no way, unless you've got an advanced law degree in entertainment law. Now the business aspect that musicians need to pay attention to is publishing. Get with a performance rights organization, either BMI, ASCAP, or whatever performance rights organization that monetizes things properly. BMI or ASCAP are the two biggest ones, or whatever country you're in, there's a version of BMI or ASCAP.
Right.
Get registered as a songwriter composer, and then eventually build up your catalog, and then get your own publisher, and at least get a co-publisher or a publisher, because then you can start getting the money. Sir Mix-a-Lot was very good at that. He had all of his records. He owned all of them. He owned the publishing on all of them. He always told artists to take care of their publishing. I listened to a lot of those interviews and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to follow that format. And then I learned as much as I could about the aspects and the economics, because the economics of the music industry are unlike any other business because of the way they distribute money and monetize credits. And then, of course, Spotify and TuneCore, kind of evolved that even more, and made it even harder to make money per stream. So then you have to go out, sell merch, and do live performances and etc. So they almost made the independent artist work twice as hard. But the deal that they made them is they were going to give them, major label distribution and exposure at the cost of everything else, because now you're getting fragments of a penny per stream, which would have been a physical sale, in the record stores prior to, the advent of streaming.
Oh yeah, but the other thing that I'm seeing more and more artists getting caught up in, and I don't know what your thoughts about it is, but I've definitely heard a lot of artists in Clubhouse and other spaces talking about it. Some that say it works for musicians, others that say it works for artists, and some that say it works for none of those. But I've heard a lot of people talking about getting into this whole NFT space. So what are your thoughts around NFTs as a means of making money and all along those lines? So what are your thoughts about
what's the acronym NFT stand for?
Non-fungible token, but it's part of that whole internet thing where you are basically, I guess, cutting out the middleman is the way they describe it, because it's supposed to be that you can sell directly to the artist, whether that's a replica of your music or a number of other things that are out there. But it's
I have not done any of that. I'm guessing it's a way, another way that artists can, probably get, I don't know, get ripped off. But anyway, I don't know the dynamics of that, so I probably shouldn't say.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because it seems to be another form of blockchain, and it seems to be tied into cryptocurrencies and other things that are out there. But I have seen some artists, including some well-known Grammy types, that have been in that space and everything. But yes, it might be something to look into. I know that I've had friends that have had that conversation, but
I'm gonna check that out. I don't know. I try not to speak on anything I don't know much about, and so I don't know a lot about that. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And sometimes you got to do the research and all that. You had mentioned earlier, and then you're ready to wind down things and everything, but you had mentioned earlier about that third career of yours. And I did say I was going to get back to that, but you mentioned definitely the music, the sports. And I think you said something about ice shaving. So I'm guessing that that's similar to like ice sculpturing and all of that. But I was wondering what that third career was and how that
shave
came
ice.
about.
I do shave ice. I work for a company here on island called Uncle Shave Ice.
Okay.
And I shave ice, which is